The dropship Hydra didn't just land on Arborea. It seemed to sigh onto the planet's surface with a gentle thump. Arborea wasn't just green, it was a living, breathing painting. Every leaf, every patch of moss, every gnarled root pulsed with soft, otherworldly colors. Imagine emeralds that winked, jades that hummed, and moss that seemed to giggle if a breeze tickled it just right. It was a place where vines did silly, slow-motion dances, and flowers opened with tiny melodic boops. The air smelled of fresh rain and something sweet, like warm cookies. This wasn't your usual grim, grey alien world. This was a whimsical, glowing wonderland, where life made its own light in the eternal twilight, under a canopy so thick, direct sunlight was just a rumor. Humans were here to study it, and maybe find some rare space minerals. Easy, right? Not exactly. Kinda glowing wonder. Inside the Hydra, the small team got ready. First, there was Commander Jax Thorne. He was built like a brick wall, all serious and by the book. His uniform was spotless, his hair was perfect, and he believed in three things: military protocols, big guns, and very loud orders. He looked at the glowing jungle outside with suspicion, like it was about to file a report against him. "All right, listen up," his voice boomed, sharp enough to cut through steel. "We set up the outpost. No funny business. Any signs of trouble, we lock down. Protocol is paramount. We do not deviate." He even tried to salute a particularly bright, wobbly tree outside, then quickly looked away, pretending he hadn't. Next was Dr. Ilara Vance. She was the exact opposite of Thorne. Ilara moved quietly, her eyes always wide with wonder, drinking in every glowing detail. She was a xenobotanist and xenobiologist, which meant she basically loved alien plants and weird creatures more than most people loved. Well, anything. She believed everything in nature had a story. She looked at the wobbly, giggling tree with pure delight, already thinking about how to hug it. Captain Rena Petrova was the team's tech guru. She lived and breathed circuits, algorithms, and anything that glowed with a man-made power source. Her uniform was always sleek, her movements precise. She was also a total germaphobe. Her worst nightmare, touching a squishy, glowing mushroom. She was currently spraying her hands with sanitizer for the 10th time, eyeing the jungle with a mixture of professional curiosity and deep suspicion. "Commander," she reported, her voice crisp. "All perimeter sensors online. Thermal cloaks active. Automated turrets standing by for any movement." She looked like she wished she could sanitize the entire planet. Lotani Rabis. And then, there was Sergeant Kale Wren. He was the quiet one, the team's scout and survival expert. Kale rarely spoke, preferring to observe. His eyes missed nothing, and he moved like a shadow, even in the glowing light. He was the kind of person who could disappear in a crowded room and reappear with your forgotten keys. He was currently checking his suppressed sidearm, his face totally blank, which made him even funnier when everyone else was freaking out. Finally, there was Lena Rostova. She was young, energetic, and super smart with computers, but when it came to anything natural or squishy, she was a walking disaster. She'd jump if a leaf looked at her funny. Right now, she was holding a tablet, peering out the viewport, and letting out little EEP noises every time a particularly bright bug zipped past. The Hydra settled down with a final, gentle thump. In just a few hours, the humans had set up their outpost. It was all sharp angles and gleaming metal, looking completely out of place amidst the ancient, glowing forest. Inside, the quiet hum of air filters and the steady glow of computer screens gave them a false sense of Earth-like safety. As Arborea's night deepened, the jungle truly came alive, the air filled with a soft, pulsing beat of light. Giant, jelly-like fungi on logs pulsed with a soothing blue, like sleepy nightlights. Vines wrapping around massive trees shimmered with delicate greens, like living neon signs. And then, the insects, swarms of them like tiny flying jewels, zipped through the air, each one flashing with bright oranges, purples, and yellows. It was a silent disco, a glowing party happening all around them. Nangia. But amidst this beautiful, slightly goofy glow, something else started to move. Something swift. Something silent. Something mischievous. These were the Umbra, Arborea's native inhabitants. They were perfectly at home in the glow. Their skin was a deep, velvety black, so dark it seemed to suck in every bit of light. making them almost impossible to spot against the shimmering plants. They didn't see like humans did. Instead, they felt the world. They felt the tiny vibrations in the air, the shifts in warmth, the faint smells of things moving. Their eyes weren't really eyes. They were clusters of little light-sensing bumps that pulsed with a faint amber glow when they were curious or focused, like tiny, glowing amber marbles. Inside the outpost, Commander Thorn felt a tiny itch of unease, something that his fancy senses didn't pick up. "Captain Petrova," he grumbled. "Any weird readings?" "I've got a bad feeling." Rena checked her console, frowning. "Negative, Commander. All systems green. Just a lot of bioluminescence. The jungle's getting very glowy." She sounded almost annoyed by how much glowing was happening. Dr. Alara Vance, though, was focused on her own, more natural senses. She was picking up faint, rhythmic energy pulses, super low sounds, almost like a deep, slow heartbeat that didn't match any of the usual jungle noises. They felt deliberate. "Commander," she said softly, her voice getting a little urgent, "I'm detecting some very unusual energy signatures. Low frequency, rhythmic, not natural background noise." Captain Petrova waved a dismissive hand. "Dr. Vance, that's just static. This planet is a biological mess, probably just a weird fungus doing weird fungus things." Thorn, trusting his tech expert, nodded in agreement. Then, BAM! A sudden jarring thud against the outpost's reinforced outer wall. The whole structure shook. Thorn's automated defense system screamed to life. Spotlights flashed wildly, energy turrets spun around, looking for targets. But they found nothing. The umbra simply melted into the overwhelming glow, perfectly hidden. Bam! Another hit. Then another. They were hitting different parts of the wall, moving too fast for the turrets to lock on. It was like they were playing whack-a-mole with the outpost. Heat signatures. Anything on thermal? Thorn roared, his voice tight with a sudden, very cold fear. Captain Rena Petrova's voice was strained, full of disbelief and a hint of panic. "Negative, Commander. They're like ghosts. My sensors are picking up nothing, and our spotlights, they just make them harder to see." She stared at her console, her face pale, her perfect composure totally gone, her super-duper technology, her pride and joy, was useless. The Umbra were playing a game of hide-and-seek, and the humans were completely blind. The silence between the BAM sounds was even scarier than the hits themselves. Inside the outpost, the BAM-BAM continued, but now it was mixed with a soft, rhythmic thump-thump-thump that made the whole structure vibrate. Commander Thorn was fuming. His high-tech screens were showing nothing but static, or sometimes a shimmering blurry pattern that looked suspiciously like a giant glowing smiley face. "This is impossible!" Thorn roared, smacking his tactical display. "My systems are the best! Why can't they see them?" He looked utterly bewildered, like a dog who couldn't find his favorite squeaky toy. Captain Rena Petrova, looking disheveled, stared at her console in defeat. "Sir, they literally eat light. Their skin absorbs every single photon, and their body heat is so low, they just look like a cold spot on our thermal scans. Our spotlights. They're basically giving them a light bath, making them even more invisible." Rena's voice had a touch of despair. Her precious tech was failing, and it was deeply offensive to her professional sensibilities. Sergeant Cale Wren, always the calm one, leaned against a reinforced viewport. "They're not seeing us, Commander," he said, his voice quiet. "They're feeling us. Our warmth, the tiny shakes when we walk, the smells. Their senses are just different. More tuned to this planet's weirdness." Thorn groaned. "So what? We just sit here and let them thump us to death? We're blind." Dr. Alara Vance, who had been watching the glowing jungle, a spark of an idea started to bubble in her mind. She'd been noticing subtle, non-threatening glow patterns during the thumping. "Commander," she began, her voice soft but firm, cutting through Thorn's frustration. "We don't fight them with our technology. We fight them with their world, with nature, with the glowing things. Thorn stared at her. Nature? Dr. Vance, are you suggesting we try to throw flowers at them? We are under attack. He looked at her like she'd just suggested they solve the problem with interpretive dance. Ilara ignored him, pointing to a fuzzy image of a slow-pulsing blue mushroom on the main screen. Commander, Captain Petrova is right, our lights make them blend. But the Umbra, they don't see light as we do. Their eyes, those little glowing bumps, they don't use light to see objects. They use it as a signal. A language. This is how they talk. This is how they know what's safe, what's food, what's a party. Like glowing emojis. Rena mumbled, finally looking up from her useless console, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Exactly, Ilara beamed. For them, a slowly pulsing blue fungus might mean safe passage or come closer, let's play. A rapidly flickering green vine might mean funny movement here, or let's go poke it. If we can understand these glowing emojis, we can trick them, prank them, make them go away. Thorn looked at the screen, then at Ilara, then back at the screen. The thump 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 of the Umbra outside was a constant, annoying reminder of his helplessness. He hated this. But he hated losing more. All right, Dr. Vance, he finally said, his voice a gruff whisper. It's wild. It's probably against several military regulations. But we're out of options. Show us how your natural glow works, and for the love of all that is logical, don't let Lena touch anything too squishy. A faint, determined smile touched Ilara's lips. This was her kind of fight. The very next morning, or what passed for morning under Arboria's emerald veil, the team prepared for their first harvest. Thorn stayed glued to his command chair, looking as if he expected the plants themselves to stage a coup. Ilara, Kale and Lena geared up. Okay team, Ilara announced, holding up a small, empty canister. First, the pulse fungi. She pointed to a cluster of blue glowing mushrooms near the airlock. They emitted a slow, sleepy hum, like tiny lullabies. They signal no threat or background noise. We'll need a lot of these. Lena, wearing giant yellow biohazard gloves that were almost bigger than her head, cautiously approached one. E.W., she said, her nose crinkling. It feels squishy. And it smells like wet socks and old leaves. As she gingerly poked it, the mushroom let out a tiny, soft burp of blue light. Lena shrieked and jumped back, nearly tripping over her own feet. Kale, standing nearby, sighed dramatically, but a corner of his mouth twitched upwards. It's just responding to touch, Lena, Ilara explained patiently, trying not to laugh. Their light output increases when stimulated. Next, Ilara led them to some flicker vines. These were like hyperactive spaghetti, bright green, wiggling and changing colors rapidly, if anything touched them. These are more active, Ilara said. Their frantic flicker mimics agitated prey, or maybe just a really excited plant. They're good for distractions. Lena, still recovering from the burping fungus, tried to carefully snip a piece of flicker vine. Instead, she got tangled. The vine wrapped around her arm, flailing wildly and flashing bright green. It's angry, Lena cried, wrestling with the vine as if it were a wrestling opponent. Kale, with his usual calm, stepped forward and with 2 precise movements, untangled her, handing her the now dazed vine. Here, he said, deadpan. And finally, Ilara whispered, leading them to a patch of broad leaves, the flare beetles. These were small, iridescent insects that looked like tiny jewels. They didn't glow unless disturbed, but when they did, they emitted a sudden, intense burst of yellow-orange light. These are special, Ilara explained. They act like a flashbang, but a natural one. We need a lot of them. Collecting the beetles was the most challenging for Lena. They zipped around like tiny, glowing drones. Lena shrieked every time one flew past her ear, glowing brightly. "It's trying to blind me," she yelled, flailing her hands wildly. Kale, however, moved with practiced ease, gently scooping up several beetles into a specialized container. He made it look effortless. Back in the outpost, Rena Petrova, her face still slightly green from the organic collecting reports, was surprisingly intrigued. "Interesting," she mumbled into her comms. "The spectral output on these fungi is highly variable, and these beetles, their light pulse is incredibly sharp, almost like a controlled energy burst. A 580 nanometer flash. What exactly do you plan to do with them, Doctor?" Her tech brain was whirring, finally seeing a logical, if slightly gross, application for these biological messes. "We're going to tell the Umbra stories, Captain," Alara replied, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Stories they can't ignore. Stories full of funny diversions, unexpected surprises, and maybe a few alien jokes. The miscommunication trap, a first prank gone wrong." Alara's first idea was simple. Lure the Umbra, then make them look silly. "Okay," she explained, drawing on the outpost's holographic map. "We'll use a dense cluster of flicker vines and some flare beetles, about 50 meters from the outpost on the west side. Their combined rapid glow should scream, 'Easy prey,' in the Umbra's language. Kyle, Lena, you two will carefully set them up. Commander, we'll position a small observation team." The plan was to watch how the Umbra reacted to this specific joke. As night fell, the west side of the outpost shimmered with frantic green light, punctuated by sharp, surprising yellow flashes. The human team, hidden behind their useless sensors, waited, hearts thumping. The Umbra came. Commander Thorne's screens picked up strong, rapid vibrations from the west. The low chitters of the Umbra echoed, growing louder, closer. The lure was working. They were moving towards it. But then, something strange happened. The Umbra didn't rush in. They paused just outside the lure perimeter. Alara, peering through a modified scope, saw their faint, amber eye clusters flickering rapidly, as if they were reading the lights. Then, with an unsettling swiftness, they started to rearrange the lights. They didn't destroy them. Instead, they took the flicker vines and flare beetles, and meticulously reshaped the glowing patterns. On the main screen, the frantic green and yellow lights shifted, twisted, and then formed a giant, glowing image. It looked exactly like a giant, glowing cartoon face sticking its tongue out. Angora. The humans stared. Silence. Then, some low, guttural chitters from the Umbra. They sounded suspiciously like suppressed giggles. After their glowing prank, the Umbra simply melted back into the darkness, leaving the humans completely flummoxed. Thorne's comms crackled. They're hitting the south wall now," Rena's voice stated, utterly bewildered. "But they drew a picture first." Commander Thorne slumped in his chair. "Unprofessional," he muttered, shaking his head. "Highly unprofessional alien behavior." Captain Rena Petrova let out a frustrated sigh. "My sensors show they didn't just ignore the lure, Commander. They modified it. They basically drew a glowing insult. It's like they knew it wasn't real, and decided to prank us back." Her earlier fascination had been replaced by a new level of confusion. Dr. Alara Vance stared at the glowing, taunting face outside. She slumped against a damp tree trunk nearby. Her first trap was a total failure. The Umbra were not just smart, they had a sense of humor. A very alien, very annoying sense of humor. They hadn't been genuinely drawn to the trap. They had recognized it as an artificial anomaly, a false message, and decided to turn the tables. But even in that moment of defeat, Alara's scientific mind buzzed. They weren't just predators, they were pranksters. They communicated through glowing jokes. Her new plan was forming, born from the ashes of her first failure, not just to attract, but to out-prank, to out-joke, and to truly baffle them, using their own environment signals against them. The game of bioluminescent chess had just become a bioluminescent prank war, and the next move had to be completely outrageous. The Umbra had left a glowing childish drawing on the outpost wall. Commander Thorne's favorite coffee mug was gone, replaced by a glowing mushroom. Ruina's robot vacuum cleaner was found covered in sticky, glowing slime. This was just the beginning. Bedtime. The giant, glowing, tongue-sticking-out face outside the outpost was a constant shimmering insult. Commander Thorn kept muttering about unauthorized alien graffiti. Dr. Ilara Vance, however, saw it as a challenge. The Umbra weren't just attacking. They were playing a cosmic prank war. And if it was a prank war, Ilara knew just the person to send behind enemy lines. Sergeant Kale Wren. Commander, Ilara said, turning from the rude glowing face to Thorn. They're not just random lights, they're communicating. And if they're sending us glowing insults, they're smart enough to have a complex language. Kale needs to go out again. He needs to see how they make their jokes. Thorn grimaced. Send a man into a glowing alien prank zone? That's not in any military manual, Doctor. Your military manuals didn't prepare us for aliens who steal coffee mugs and draw glowing caricatures of their enemies, Commander, Kale said, his voice surprisingly dry. He was already checking his gear, his face calm. I can move silently. I'll get close enough to see their giggles. Captain Rena Petrova, still annoyed that her robot vacuum had been slimed, piped up. All right, Kale, but you're getting my latest biorecorders. They're super sensitive. She handed him a small device that looked like a sleek, glowing pebble. Just don't lose it. It cost a fortune. Kale simply nodded, pocketing the pebble. Kale's secret mission, a light-hearted sneak. Under the deepening twilight, Kale slipped out. He was like a ninja made of shadows. He moved through the glowing jungle, every step soft, every movement fluid. He avoided the bright vines and humming fungi, trying not to disturb the natural glow rhythm. He moved towards the area where the Umbra had left their glowing artwork. The air was thick with the sweet smell of Arboria's plants, and a faint, almost ticklish scent that Kyle now recognized as the Umbra's unique smell. He could hear their low, chittering sounds. Closer now, a chorus of alien murmurs. Kale found a good hiding spot behind a giant, non-glowing fern that looked like a very large, shy umbrella. He activated Rinna's biorecorder. He held his breath as a pair of Umbra drifted into view. Their black forms were almost impossible to see, but their clusters of amber eyes pulsed with a soft, curious glow as they moved. Kale watched them closely. He saw them interact with the environment in ways Ilara had only guessed at. One Umbra bumped playfully into a patch of red swirl moss. The moss flared brightly, then began to slowly swirl with crimson light, drawing a goofy spiral. The other Umbra immediately turned, its eye clusters pulsing faster, and it responded by drawing a glowing wavy line next to it, like a funny comment. They were having a light-based conversation. Later, Kale observed a group of Umbra playing a strange game. They would chase small, glowing insects, not to eat them, but to make them glow brighter with fear. As the insects tried to escape, their frantic green and yellow glows would become more intense. But the Umbra weren't just chasing the light, they seemed to be listening to the very frequency of the light pulses, or maybe the tiny panicked squeaks the insects emitted. When the insect's light reached a certain frantic flicker rate, the Umbra would make a playful pounce, and then let the insect go, as if it was all a big glowing game of tag. Kale almost chuckled when an Umbra, trying to be sneaky, accidentally bumped its head on a low-hanging blue pulse fungus. The mushroom let out a loud, comical boop of light. The Umbra flinched, then looked around guiltily, as if caught breaking a rule. Its fellow Umbra giggled with light patterns. This was definitely a language, and it was full of silly sounds. Kale spent what felt like an eternity out there, barely moving. He almost had a really close call. An Umbra, sensing something, floated dangerously close to his hiding spot. Its glowing eye clusters narrowed, its head tilted, as if trying to sniff out a prank. Kale froze, his heart thumping like a drum. Just when he thought he was caught, a glowing frog-like creature nearby let out a loud, bubbly ribbit of light, distracting the Umbra. It floated off, seemingly satisfied that Kale was just a very quiet, non-glowing rock. Finally, Just before Arboria's dim dawn, Kale made his way back, exhausted, but carrying a treasure trove of light data, decoding the jokes, the GIGGLE translator incident. Back in the outpost, Ilara, Rina and Thorn gathered around as Kale uploaded the recordings. The screen was a chaotic swirl of alien glow, but as Ilara ran her analysis programs, distinct patterns began to pop out. "Incredible!" Ilara whispered, watching the replay of the red swirl moss, the red glow, and that swirling pattern. "It's a playful territory marker. They're using it to draw goofy pictures in their space. And when one Umbra draws, the others add to it. It's like a shared canvas." Captain Rina Petrova, completely absorbed now, pointed at another sequence. "And look here, the flare beetles." When Kale startled that beetle, its flash was interpreted as a loud, surprised yelp, but when the Umbra themselves make a quick move, they emit a slightly different frequency of light from their eyes, or a controlled vibration. It's a surprise signal. So the beetles mimic a sudden, startled yell, but the Umbra have their own specific surprise frequency. Ilara nodded, her mind racing. And the flicker vines, they're not just prey, they're agitated, playful prey. The more frantic the flicker, the more exciting the chase. But if it flickers too wildly, or in a pattern they don't expect, they treat it with suspicion, like our first failed trap. Commander Thorn watched, utterly fascinated. His skepticism had completely melted away, replaced by a strange mix of awe and annoyance. "So, their entire world is a massive, glowing joke book," he muttered. "They use the blue pulse fungi as a safe passage or background hum, but disturbing it means, oops, I tripped. The green flicker vines signify playful chase, or something interesting moving, though too weird a flicker suggests, that's a bad joke. Red swirl moss clearly marks my drawing spot, or, hey, look what I drew, and the yellow flare beetles act as a sudden surprise, or gotcha signal." A new plan began to take shape in Ilara's mind. They wouldn't just try to lure the Umbra, they would prank them back. They would use Arboria's natural bioluminescence to tell them silly stories, to create funny illusions, to challenge them to a game of light-up charades. They would use the red swirl moss to draw funny pictures, distracting them from the outpost. They would use controlled flicker vines to make them chase imaginary friends. And they would use activated flare beetles to create sudden, hilarious bursts, making the Umbra jump. Captain Rina Petrova's face was alight with excitement. "Dr. Vance, if we can control the patterns and intensity, I can design automated deployment devices for these organisms. And perhaps even integrate a frequency modulator that mimics the Umbra's own internal light signals, a sort of counter-joke that would totally baffle them." Her tech brain was now buzzing with biological possibilities, finally finding a way to combine her engineering expertise with Ilara's weird plants. The GIGGLE translator incident. Rina, eager to put her new insights to work, got to work on what she called the GIGGLE translator. It was meant to help them understand the Umbra's light language in real time, turning patterns into clear, understandable data. She worked for hours, humming to herself, surrounded by glowing screens. "Almost got it," she announced triumphantly. "Just a final calibration." She pressed a button. Instead of a clear translation, a loud, high-pitched, incredibly realistic "giggle, giggle, giggle" sound blasted through the outpost's comms system at maximum volume. It echoed through the corridors, making everyone jump. Thorn nearly fell out of his chair. Kale flinched, his hand going to his sidearm. Lena let out a small shriek. Rina stared at her console, mortified. "Oops," she squeaked. "It seems I translated a common Umbra laughing pattern, and accidentally set it to broadcast." Thorn slowly stood up, looking utterly bewildered. "Captain Petrova," he said, his voice flat, "did you just turn our military outpost into a clown show?" Rina quickly slammed her hand over the broadcast button, turning off the alien giggles. "Well, Commander," she said, trying to regain her composure, "it certainly got their attention. My sensors are picking up unusual light patterns outside. Looks like confusion. Or maybe they're just laughing at us." Suddenly, the Umbra outside seemed to respond. On the outer wall, near where the tongue-sticking-out drawing still glowed, new lights appeared. A small, glowing stick figure Umbra appeared next to the drawing, pointing at the outpost and seemingly shaking with silent laughter. Their light patterns did a rapid, wavy flicker that Alara now recognized as amusement. "They are laughing at us," Thorn groaned, running a hand over his face. He actually looked less angry and more utterly defeated by the absurdity of the situation. "All right," he sighed. "If they want a prank war, they've got one. But we will win it, with more and better pranks." The game had changed. The humans were no longer just survivors. They were combatants in a cosmic game of glowing practical jokes. And the next night, Arboria's glowing jungle wouldn't just be a beautiful backdrop. It would become a dazzling, ridiculous, and utterly unpredictable battlefield of light and laughter. This was going to be interesting. The giant, glowing, tongue-sticking-out face, now joined by a silently laughing stick figure Umbra, hung outside the outpost like a digital billboard of alien mockery. Commander Thorn grumbled, Lena kept giggling every time she looked at it, and Rena furiously typed on her console, trying to figure out the exact mathematical formula for a perfect glowing insult. "All right," Alara announced, clapping her hands together, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "New plan. We don't just defend, we prank them back. We make this outpost the most unfun, confusing, and hilariously absurd place in the entire jungle. We'll win this prank war." Thorn raised an eyebrow. "Doctor, we are a military operation. We do not engage in prank wars with alien entities." "Commander," Ilara countered with a grin, "they stole your coffee mug and slimed Rena's robot vacuum. This is war, a very silly war." Thorn sighed, but a tiny, almost invisible smile played on his lips. He wanted that coffee mug back, Nifima, the fake mealworm lure, and the dancing fungi. Their first official counterprank was a classic. "We'll create a super enticing prey pattern with flicker vines," Ilara explained, pointing at the map. Something irresistible to a curious Umbra. But when they get close, Kale and Lena, now more experienced with handling the squishy glowing things, though Lena still shrieked occasionally, carefully set up the vines. The green lights pulsed in a rapid, wiggly pattern, looking exactly like a giant, juicy, glowing mealworm. The Umbra arrived. Their amber eye clusters pulsed with curiosity. They drifted closer, slowly. Just as their shadowy forms were about to touch the glowing mealworm, Rena hit the trigger. Whoosh! The flicker vines suddenly twisted and reshaped themselves into a huge, glowing, cartoonish face, with its tongue stuck out, right back at the Umbra. The Umbra paused. Their light patterns flickered erratically, like confused question marks. Then, to the humans' surprise, some of them let out rapid, high-pitched giggles in light, and a few even seemed to cover their glowing eye clusters, as if in embarrassment. They then zipped away, probably to tell their friends about the humans' weird, glowing trick. "Score one for us," Lena cheered, pumping her fist in the air. Next up was the dancing fungus diversion. "We'll use pulse fungi to create synchronized, goofy dance routines," Ilara planned. "It should be distracting enough to move supplies without drawing direct attention." Rina programmed the fungi. Suddenly, patches of blue glowing mushrooms outside the outpost started to pulse and shrink, then grow and pulse again, as if doing a clumsy alien jig. The Umbra nearby stopped. Their amber eyes glowed, fascinated. Some of them even started to mimic the moves, their shadowy forms swaying slightly, trying to follow the fungi's awkward dance steps. "They're dancing," Thorn muttered, utterly bewildered. "That's not in my combat training manual." While the Umbra were busy trying to perfect their alien disco moves, Kale and Lena quietly moved boxes of equipment from a vulnerable section of the outpost. It was slow work, but surprisingly effective. Lena's unexpected contribution and Thorn's embarrassing encounter. The prank war was going well, but then Lena had an accidental stroke of genius. She was carrying a canister of flare beetles, still nervous around them. As she walked, her foot caught on a stray root, and she tumbled forward, spilling the entire canister. Poof! Thousands of flare beetles erupted in a massive, blinding flash of yellow-orange light. It was pure, chaotic, eye-stinging brilliance. The Umbra around the outpost immediately recoiled, startled. Their light patterns went wild, shrieking in confusion. But then, something amazing happened. Instead of panicking, some of them started imitating the flash. They pulsed their own light clusters with rapid, chaotic bursts, like a dozen alien camera flashes going off at once. It turned into a chaotic, dazzling light show, a spontaneous contest of who can flash brighter and funnier. "Whoa!" Rinna exclaimed, watching the display. "Lena, you just invented the Giggle flashbang. They think it's a game." Lena, still on the ground, looked up, wide-eyed. I just tripped." "It was brilliant," Elara declared. "Spontaneous, unexpected chaos. They love it." Commander Thorn, despite himself, found a new level of embarrassment. He decided to try a serious countermove. "All right," he said with a sigh. "I will deploy a direct, non-negotiable warning signal." He set up a special projector to shine a single, solid, unwavering red beam of light onto a section of the wall where the Umbra were congregating. It was meant to say, "Stay away." The Umbra looked at it, their amber eyes pulsed. Then, slowly, playfully, they started to rearrange the nearby glowing moss and fungi. The solid red beam began to morph. It grew eyes, then a nose, then a huge, grumpy, scowling mouth. It was a perfect, glowing caricature of Commander Thorn's very own grumpy face, complete with glowing military hat. Thorn stared at it, utterly mortified. They did not just do that," he whispered, his face turning as red as the glowing caricature. The Umbra, having finished their masterpiece, emitted low, chittering sounds that clearly conveyed alien amusement. A couple of them even seemed to high-five with glowing tentacles. The outpost becomes a rave. From that night on, the perimeter of the human outpost turned into a chaotic, dazzling, and utterly ridiculous light show every night. The Umbra, now fully convinced this was a fun game, started creating their own wild light patterns, challenging the humans to respond. They'd send a pattern of glowing jumping jacks, and the humans would respond with a shimmering alien polka. Rinna, embracing the madness, tried to use complex math to predict their next move, sketching out light sequences like a DJ planning a rave. The outpost, once a sterile, serious research station, was slowly becoming the center of Arboria's wildest, most unpredictable light party. And the humans, whether they liked it or not, were the main entertainment. The prank war was officially on, and it was getting very, very silly. The outpost was no longer a military base. It was a bizarre, glowing art gallery. Thorn's grumpy face caricature still blazed on the wall, and now, a glowing depiction of Rinna frantically trying to sanitize a giant mushroom had appeared next to it. The Umbra were getting bolder with their glowing critiques. "This is getting out of hand." Thorn grumbled, though Elara noticed he'd been caught once or twice trying to discreetly adjust the nose on his glowing caricature to make it look less grumpy. Then, one morning, something new appeared outside the airlock. It was a glowing, pulsating blob of alien material, about the size of a small car. It shifted colors slowly, hummed a deep, resonant tune, and occasionally sprouted a tiny, wobbly appendage that waved gently. It looked completely harmless, almost like a giant, friendly marshmallow. "What in Arborea is that?" Rinna asked, scanning it cautiously. "A gift, I think," Elara whispered, her eyes wide with excitement. She brought up Kale's latest recordings. The blob pulsed with a complex light pattern, one she hadn't seen before. After a moment, Rinna's giggle translator chirped. "It says, 'We challenge you to a show. A grand light-off. Prove your glow. Or are you boring?'" Thorn stared. "They're challenging us to a glow-off, like a dance-off, with lights." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "This is highly irregular." "Commander, this is how they interact." Elara practically vibrated with excitement. "It's an invitation. A way to understand us, and for us to understand them. We have to accept." Rinna was already buzzing. "A grand light-off. Technically, we have the processing power to outglow them. This is a scientific and engineering challenge, Commander." Training Lena, and the giant glowing blob strategy. Ilara looked at Lena, who was still trying to avoid anything that glowed too brightly. "Lena," Ilara said gently, "if we're going to win this glow-off, you need to be comfortable with our glowing friends. You're great with programming the drones, but you need to understand the material." Lena gulped. "But they're so squishy, and they burp." "We'll start small," Ilara promised. She brought out a tiny, unassuming pulse fungus. A very gentle, slow-pulsing blue one. "This little guy needs a name, and you need to take care of it." Lena reluctantly took the glowing mushroom. It hummed softly in her hand. Okay. How about Sparky?" Over the next few days, the outpost became a strange sight. While Rena worked on programming grand light sequences, and Kale meticulously mapped new sources of bioluminescence, Lena was constantly carrying Sparky around. At first, she held it at arm's length. Then, she started talking to it, telling it about her drone programs. By the end of the week, she was gently stroking its cap, and Sparky would hum faster, almost purring. Lena even learned that if you gently bounced Sparky, it would let out a tiny, happy boop of light. This was a true breakthrough for Lena. For the main event, the team decided their biggest prank yet would be the giant glowing blob. This wasn't just a simple lure. It was a constantly shifting, growing and changing mass of mixed organisms designed to overwhelm the Umbra with pure, non-threatening absurdity. "We'll use thousands of flicker vines, pulse fungi, and flare beetles," Ilara explained. "Rena, you'll program them to continuously shift patterns, colors, and even emit silly, random sounds. It will be a living, breathing, unpredictable spectacle. It'll be glorious," Rena exclaimed, her fingers flying across her console, already imagining the complex algorithms. "We'll create patterns that contradict themselves, colors that clash, and sounds that make no sense. Pure, glorious, controlled chaos." Kale's stealthy setup, and the first glow-off round. Kale, as usual, was tasked with the most dangerous part, deploying the base elements of the giant glowing blob near Umbra territory, deep in the jungle. He moved like a true ghost, sliding through the glowing foliage. He was almost done, carefully setting up a patch of flicker vines, when he accidentally brushed against a patch of giggle grass, a very rare shimmering plant that emitted loud, high-pitched giggling sounds when stepped on. "Giggle! Giggle! Squeak!" Kale froze. He sighed dramatically, a tiny cloud of mist escaping his lips in the humid air. He quickly moved, but he knew the sound would have carried. He heard faint chitters in the distance. The Umbra were definitely alerted. He just hoped they thought it was another jungle creature having a laugh. The outpost buzzed with anticipation. As Arboria's twilight deepened, the giant glowing blob was activated. It swelled to an enormous size, a kaleidoscope of changing colors. It pulsed with a deep, rumbling hum, then let out a comical BWOing, followed by a series of rapid boop-boop-boop-boops. The flicker vines on its surface danced like frantic noodles, and flare beetles embedded within it flashed in dizzying random bursts. The Umbra appeared. Hundreds of them. They surrounded the giant glowing blob, their amber eye clusters pulsing rapidly. They drifted closer, then stopped. Their light patterns showed utter bewilderment. They stared at the blob as it swelled and shrunk, changed colors like a moody chameleon, and played its symphony of silly noises. Some Umbra extended a shadowy appendage, carefully poking the blob, only for it to let out a loud, surprising honk and change color from blue to bright pink. The Umbra recoiled, then some of them started to emit rapid, high-frequency giggles with their lights, a clear sign of amusement. A few even tried to hug the blob, only to be surprised when a new, wobbly appendage suddenly grew and tickled them. The humans watched on the camera feeds, trying not to burst out laughing. "They're completely baffled," Rena whispered, her eyes glued to the screen. Their organized mischief has turned into confused, playful attempts to interact with it. This is brilliant. Thorn, who had been trying to maintain a stern military expression, suddenly let out a loud snort. "Did that one just try to cuddle the blob?" he asked, completely bewildered. He shook his head, but a genuine smile, the first in days, spread across his face. The prank war was definitely heating up, and the humans had just landed a truly baffling blow. The giant glowing blob continued its chaotic, mesmerizing performance outside the outpost, pulsing and wobbling with hilarious energy. The Umbra, initially baffled, were now completely engrossed. Some of them were trying to dance with it, others poked it cautiously, and a few seemed to be sketching their own glowing versions of it on nearby moss. They're trying to interact with it," Ilara whispered, watching the feeds from Kale's remote bio-cameras. "This isn't just a prank war anymore, Commander. It's becoming a dialogue." Rena, however, saw it as a competition. "Commander," she declared, her eyes narrowed at her console. "They're attempting to cheat. Look! They're amplifying their own light patterns using natural glowing crystals hidden in the trees, and some are trying to mimic our outpost's power lights in funny ways." Indeed, a section of the perimeter lights on the outpost started to flicker in a rapid, almost taunting sequence. It looked suspiciously like the Umbra were doing a glowing nya 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 at the humans. Rena, the fiercely competitive tech specialist, felt a surge of professional rivalry. "Oh, it's on," she muttered, furiously programming a counter-sequence. Ilara's cultural realization and Thorn's embarrassing encounter. As the glow-off continued, Ilara watched the Umbra's patterns intently. She noticed that when the humans created a particularly complex or funny light display, the Umbra didn't just respond, they seemed to study it. Then, they'd try to replicate it, sometimes adding their own unique, playful twist. "They're not just playing," Ilara mused aloud. "This is their form of cultural exchange. It's how they learn about new species, how they interact, and how they establish their own playful dominance. It's a way of saying, 'We're curious. Who are you?'" Meanwhile, Commander Thorn, still trying to maintain some military decorum, was pacing the command center. "We need to ensure tactical superiority," he barked. "Rena, increase frequency on the blue pulse fungi to assert dominance." Rena, without looking up, quickly typed a command. Suddenly, a patch of blue pulse fungi near Thorn's position flared brightly, then began to wiggle in a way that looked suspiciously like a tiny glowing salute. Thorn, caught off guard, instinctively gave a sharp, crisp salute back to the fungi, a beat of silence. Then, on the outer wall, new glowing figures appeared, small Umbra stick figures, perfectly mimicking Thorn's salute, then suddenly doing a series of glowing cartwheels. Thorn's face turned beet red. They interpret that as a challenge, Commander," Ilara explained, trying to stifle a giggle. "A challenge to a light-up dance." "Looks like you're up," Thorn groaned. "I did not sign up for alien disco battles." But, feeling the pressure of the Umbra's glowing dare, he awkwardly tried to mimic a few of the cartwheel movements with his arms, his serious military bearing completely collapsing into something resembling a giant, flailing glowworm. Rena and Lena burst into muffled laughter. Even Kale's lips twitched. Lena and her pet, and the Umbra art gallery, the glow-off was reaching its peak. Everyone was focused on their tasks, controlling different sections of the luminous labyrinth. Lena, now surprisingly confident, was programming a drone to deploy a new batch of super-bright flicker vines. "Going for maximum sparkle," she cheered. Suddenly, a tiny, happy, boop sound came from Lena's pocket. It was Sparky, her pulse fungus pet. In the chaos of the glow-off, Sparky had accidentally slipped out of her pocket. "Sparky!" Lena shrieked, watching in horror as the little glowing mushroom floated out of the outpost's open airlock, caught in an air current. Before anyone could react, Sparky drifted right into the middle of the Umbra's current light display. The Umbra were in the middle of creating a complex, shimmering spiral. When Sparky floated into it, the little fungus, startled by the intense Umbra lights, pulsed frantically, then let out a series of rapid, high-pitched giggles, a sound no one had expected from a pulse fungus. The Umbra instantly froze, Their own light patterns flickered, then went completely silent. They stared at Sparky. Sparky, in turn, let out another series of frantic giggles, and pulsed with an almost alarming brightness. Then, the Umbra's patterns shifted. They began to mimic Sparky's chaotic, happy giggles, weaving them into their spiral. The resulting light show was incredibly unique, beautiful, and utterly unintended. A mix of Umbra complexity and Sparky's random, joyful bursts. Both sides were momentarily stunned by the sheer beauty of the accidental pattern. Lena, seeing her chance, bravely dashed out of the outpost. "Sparky! Come here, you little rascal!" She scooped up her glowing pet, hugged it close, and quickly darted back inside. The Umbra, after a moment of watching, resumed their glow-off, now incorporating Sparky's chaotic, giggle pattern into their repertoire, as if it was a new, exciting dance move. Later, after a particularly intense glow-off round, where the humans had used a dizzying sequence of flare beetle flash bombs, the Umbra paused. Then, in a final, grand gesture, they created a massive light art gallery across the entire jungle perimeter. There were glowing caricatures of Thorn doing his awkward dance, Rinna trying to sanitize a giant glowing monster, and even a tiny glowing depiction of Sparky the fungus. It was a clear sign. They saw the humans as fellow players in this bizarre luminous game. The prank war was no longer just about driving the Umbra away. It was about communicating, understanding, and even competing in a friendly, albeit utterly bonkers, way. The stage was set for the grand finale. The outpost was a chaotic mix of frantic programming, glowing organism wrangling, and nervous excitement. The Umbra's light art gallery, especially the glowing Thorn caricature doing cartwheels, was a constant reminder of the big challenge ahead. The Umbra had sent their most complex light pattern yet, an invitation to a final show, a massive synchronized display of bioluminescence that would determine the master of light. "This is it, team," Ilara announced, her eyes shining with determination. "The ultimate glow-off. This isn't about winning or losing in our human sense. It's about demonstrating our ability to understand and interact with their world. It's about proving we're not boring." Thorn, surprisingly, was fully on board. "All right, if they want a show, we'll give them a show," he declared, though he still occasionally mumbled about unauthorized light pollution. He tried to strategize it like a military operation, drawing up complex diagrams of where each glowing organism should go. "We need optimal deployment zones for the pulse fungi, maximum coverage for the flicker vines, and synchronized bursts from the flare beetles." Rena, meanwhile, was debating optimal light frequencies and pulse rates with herself. No, a 750 nanometer wave at 120 beats per minute will be too aggressive. We need something that says, playful, yet overwhelmingly impressive. She was sketching out light sequences like a mad scientist planning the biggest rave in the galaxy. Kale, as always, was focused on safety and logistics. "I'll ensure the automated deployment drones are secure, and the energy conduits are stable," he said calmly, already checking his gear. He just wanted to make sure nobody accidentally got covered in glowing slime during the main event. Lena, however, was the unexpected star. Now completely comfortable with the bioluminescence, and with Sparky happily humming on her shoulder, she was brimming with creative ideas. "What if," she began, "we used the flare beetles, not just to flash, but to draw quick, simple shapes in the air, like a glowing smiley face that pops up and disappears?" Her suggestions were surprisingly creative and utterly ridiculous, perfect for the Umbra's sense of humor, the outpost rave activation. As the chosen hour approached, a strange silence fell over Arborea. Even the usual soft giggles of the jungle seemed to hold their breath. The Umbra had gathered in massive numbers, their amber eye clusters a sea of pulsing curiosity, waiting for the humans' grand show. Then, Rena gave the signal. "Activating Outpost Rave Protocol." Whoosh! The entire outpost, previously a sterile metal box, suddenly erupted with light. Panels on its exterior opened, revealing thousands of meticulously arranged flicker vines and pulse fungi. The vines danced in dizzying synchronized patterns, creating shimmering green waves that flowed across the outpost walls. The fungi pulsed with blues and purples, forming giant, intricate mandalas that slowly rotated and changed. Drones, previously used for reconnaissance, now zipped through the air. They weren't armed with weapons, but with special dispensers that dropped glowing organisms like confetti. Thousands of flare beetles rained down, creating a dazzling, sparkling cloud around the outpost, each beetle flashing in a precisely choreographed sequence. Sonic emitters, designed for mapping the terrain, now played rhythmic, playful tunes. Not loud, booming music, but a series of delightful boops, giggles, honks, and whooshes that Alara and Rina had painstakingly extracted from Kale's recordings of the Umbra's own playful communications. The sheer scale and coordinated absurdity of it was overwhelming. The outpost had transformed into a living, breathing, luminous carnival. Commander Thorne, standing on the observation deck, had his jaw practically on the floor. "By the stars," he murmured, completely awestruck. "It's magnificent." And utterly insane. The Umbra's reaction, and the giggle bomb, accidental success. The Umbra, a vast audience of shadowy forms and glowing eyes, were completely blown away. Their light patterns shifted from excited curiosity to utter awe. They pulsed with such intensity that the ground vibrated faintly. They tried to respond, sending their own awe-inspiring yet still playful displays of light. Some Umbra created massive, glowing spirals that stretched into the canopy. Others formed glowing interconnected chains, attempting to match the human scale, sometimes comically failing or creating patterns that were too intense, and then quickly dimming them with an apologetic flicker. They were doing their best to keep up, but the humans' rave was simply too much. Then came the climax. Rina had programmed a grand finale, a crescendo of light and sound. But just as she hit the final button, an old circuit, weakened by too many coffee spills, suddenly shorted with a loud pop. Instead of the planned, majestic finale, the outpost systems went haywire. Every single known bioluminescent pattern, every recorded sound effect, every frequency, every color, every light pulse, it all activated at once. The flare beetles went into a chaotic frenzy, flashing thousands of times per second. The flicker vines convulsed in a blinding, multicolored blur. The pulse fungi pulsed so fast they looked like shimmering strobes. The sonic emitters blasted every recorded giggle, boop, and honk simultaneously, creating a cacophony of joyful, nonsensical sound. It was a true giggle bomb. A chaotic, glorious explosion of pure, unadulterated, accidental joy and absurdity. The Umbra, instead of being disoriented or scared by this unplanned explosion, did something truly amazing. They didn't just recoil, they started laughing. Their bodies, usually so composed, began to twitch and shimmer with rapid, high-frequency, joyful light pulses. Some of them actually seemed to roll on the ground, their shadowy forms convulsing with silent, glowing amusement. It was as if the humans, through sheer glorious accident, had created the funniest, most unexpected joke in the history of Arborea. They laughed and pulsed, and then, slowly, one by one, they began to retreat, not in defeat or in fear, but in sheer, overwhelmed amusement. They pulsed one last, long, collective giggle pattern towards the outpost, as if saying, "You win! That was the funniest thing we've ever seen." Then they melted back into the deep jungle, leaving the outpost humming, still sporadically twitching with random, residual giggles. The humans had won the prank war, not with a clever trap, but with an accidental masterpiece of pure, chaotic fun. The following morning, on Arborea, the jungle was quieter than it had been in days. The chaotic symphony of giggles and honks from the previous night had faded, leaving behind only the soft, natural hum of the bioluminescent plants. The air smelled fresh, like a giant cosmic party had just ended, and all the confetti had biodegraded into pleasant scents. Inside the outpost, the humans were exhausted but exhilarated. Commander Thorne, usually so stiff, leaned back in his chair, a look of utter bewilderment still on his face. He watched a faint residual flicker on the outer wall, a tiny glowing Umbra stick figure that was still subtly twitching with what looked like residual laughter. I can't believe it," Thorne muttered, shaking his head slowly. "We didn't just deter them, We made them laugh. My entire military career, and it comes down to winning a prank war with a spontaneous giggle bomb." He ran a hand over his face, but a small, genuine smile finally broke through. "All right, Ilara, you were right. Traditional warfare isn't always the answer. These Umbra, they're intelligent, playful, not just threats." He even admitted, somewhat grudgingly, I think I actually had fun." The new mission, symbiotic coexistence. The mission on Arborea shifted completely. No longer was it just about extracting minerals or establishing a sterile foothold. The focus was now on symbiotic coexistence. The outpost, once a purely military scientific outpost, would become a hub for studying Arborea's complex bioluminescence, its communication, and finding a way for humans and Umbra to live side by side, sharing the planet without resorting to glowing practical jokes, at least not all the time. Dr. Ilara Vance was absolutely thrilled. Her theories about nature's complex languages, about understanding alien species through their environment, rather than just their defenses, had been proven in the most bizarre and wonderful way possible. She immediately began compiling a massive GIGGLE dictionary, trying to catalog all the different light patterns, their associated sounds, and their meanings. "This is just the beginning," she declared, her eyes sparkling. "Imagine what else they can teach us." Captain Rena Petrova, too, had found a new purpose. Her germophobia seemed to have lessened, replaced by a profound curiosity about organic tech. She was already designing new systems that wouldn't just resist bioluminescence, but integrate with it. "If we can transmit specific light patterns, Commander," she explained excitedly, "we might be able to establish long-distance communication with the Umbra. Imagine talking to them, not with words, but with synchronized light shows. We could build glow paths for safer travel, or even signal no-go zones, with a specific universally understood giggle pattern." She even touched a gently glowing mushroom on her console, marveling at its light, without reaching for her hand sanitizer. Sergeant Cale Wren continued his patrols. But now, his silent movements through the jungle had a new purpose. He wasn't just observing for threats, he was observing for playful patterns. He'd occasionally see an Umbra practicing a new glowing dance, or drawing a silly picture, and Cale would sometimes respond with a subtle, non-verbal nod of light from a small, controlled luminescent patch on his arm, a silent acknowledgement of their shared strange world. He was the quiet ambassador, learning their customs one glow at a time. Lena Rostova, the once terrified computer expert, had undergone the biggest transformation. She was now completely comfortable with the bioluminescence. Sparky, her pulse fungus pet, was a constant companion, happily perched on her shoulder, emitting tiny, contented boops. Lena taught the new research recruits how to interpret the simpler giggles and hums of the plants, explaining the nuances of a happy burp versus a surprised flash. She even proposed creating a Giggle Glow learning module for all future human visitors to Arborea, the outpost as a light park. The perimeter of the outpost, once a barrier of sterile metal and blinking red lights, was transformed. It became a constantly evolving, beautiful light show. Special panels were installed, filled with various bioluminescent organisms, programmed by Rena to display friendly, welcoming patterns. The boundary no longer screamed, "Danger, stay away!" Instead, it pulsed with colors and gentle sounds that said, "Human territory, but we're friendly. And we're pretty fun too." It deterred the Umbra not with fear, but with respect for their playful nature, a constant invitation to a new kind of interaction. In the deepest parts of Arborea's glowing jungle, an Umbra drifted silently. Its amber eye clusters pulsed with a thoughtful, rhythmic beat. It looked towards the distant, shimmering glow of the human outpost. A faint, complex pattern of light pulsed from its body. A slow, gentle, almost curious boop. A silent, friendly acknowledgement across the luminous jungle. The prank war was over, the party had begun, and the humans and Umbra were finally learning to communicate in the most dazzling and delightful way possible.